Hi everyone, I'm Representative Dr. Michelle Au. I'm a physician, a mom, and a Georgia state lawmaker. Welcome to the Georgia Diagnosis, a podcast that takes you behind the scenes of the state capitol to explore how policy really gets made and how it affects our lives. We'll talk with the people shaping Georgia's future and dig into the stories, the struggles, and solutions that define our state. This is the Georgia Diagnosis, where we take the pulse of Georgia politics. So hello everyone, and welcome to the Georgia Diagnosis. So in today's episode, we're going to talk about the relationship between politics and journalism. I think there's probably few professions that are as tightly intertwined as politics and journalism. And generally speaking, when we think about journalists, we trust them to bring the truth to light. We trust them to educate the public about the workings of their government. We expect them to elevate important issues that may require some more visibility. And they even shape the discussion and progress of policy that we work on at the State House. So this work, like all interesting professions, exists at attention, right? So lawmakers often need journalists to highlight their work, but they may also sometimes chafe at coverage that does not fit their preferred narratives, right? So this interface is what we're going to be talking about today. And I'm so delighted to be joined by three reporters from the AJC, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, who I'm going to introduce right now. We have Greg Bluestein, who is a chief political correspondent with AJC. We have Maya Prabhu, and we also have Ariel Hart. So welcome, guys. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having us.
So I have some questions. This is going to be a fun conversation, I think. And, you know, I'm always very interested in sort of the behind the scenes of what it's like to be a political reporter and just how you do the jobs that you do, right? So this first question, talk to me about the relationships that you develop with lawmakers over time. You know, we always hear that politics is about relationships, and that's definitely true within the chamber, but that's probably true for you guys also, right? So how do you cultivate those relationships, and how does that help your reporting?
I always tell people we are there before, we're there during, or we're there after. Stacey Abrams is a good example. You know, we were there covering her before she was Stacey Abrams, before she was this national figure. We, of course, covered her rise to the governor's race and national stardom in the political world when everyone else is also covering her, but we're also still covering her and everything else in Georgia politics. You learn to develop relationships with not just the political candidates and political office holders themselves, but also the operatives and aides around them. And relationships matter. You know, you develop a relationship of credibility with them. They develop with you too, because a lot of these people working on certain campaigns, they know that the relationship long outlasts those campaigns. So if they do you wrong, you'll remember it 5, 7, 10 years down the road. So people keep that in mind.
Yeah, and when you were saying we're here before, during, and after, I was thinking about it in a different context in that I say to a lot of people, sometimes I'll be accused of like, oh, you want this person to win in this race. And I'm like, honestly, I don't care because I've been here and I will still be here after whoever is in that office is no longer there. So like having connections to the actual folks in office is one piece of it, but like Greg said, the staff is oftentimes even more important because I just think about, for example, covering the Senate and the majority leader, right? That we just had turnover there, but a lot of the staff is going to be the same. And so those are people who I've worked with for years already, and I don't have to cultivate as much of our work is hard to cultivate as much of a relationship as far as like for access that I would have if it was a whole new slate of people.
Yeah, and same. I mean, and especially when you cover policy like I do, it's so important to have those relationships with people so you can at least understand what's trying to pass or what people are saying. Because I think some people have this idea that you're out to or that the press is out to ambush this or that. And really, most of the time, I'm just trying to understand stuff.
And that doesn't mean those relationships are always cordial. We're always respectful, but things get testy. Things can certainly get hostile. We all have battle scars of people who we might all have good relationships now, but things can get really testy, especially when crises happened. Coronavirus pandemic was among the many that really tested a lot of our relationships with a lot of our office holders.
You do have good relationships, I think, all three of you, with lawmakers in the chamber. You ever find that that sort of normal human friendship can get in the way of reporting a story, or that people will sometimes take offense because they view the relationship in a certain way and are upset with some of the coverage? Do people text you at home and give you
Yeah.
stories? Oh, I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, and I think Maya will have interesting insight on this too, covering this Georgia Senate so closely. But I'll cover I'll go back and forth between the chambers and of course cover the campaign trails. And yeah, you get to know the people you cover, right? I joke around. It's only half of joke during campaign season, but I talk to some aides as much as I talk to some family members, right? Not my kids or wife, but maybe some of my cousins, because I'm talking to these folks all the time, multiple times a day. And so you do develop a rapport. Um, and growing up in Atlanta, like I did, the weird thing is some of the people I grew up with are now also either in the political game or in elected office themselves. One of my neighbors was a state house member. And high school classmates are now in the Georgia General Assembly. So there's no way to divorce yourself from that. But at the same time, you've got a job to do. They know you've got a job to do. They know that you will write stories they don't like about them sometimes, because that's our job as journalists.
And I think having those relationships sometimes makes those more difficult stories easier to write because I can go to them and I'm be like, look, you're not going to look good in this story. You can choose to talk to me, but if you don't, just know I'm still writing this story. And like I can have that conversation with them and talk them through it. And I think because there's a trust there, a lot of times they'll be like, okay, well, let me say this, and so the relationships can be like beneficial when you hit some of those testier issues.
Yeah, it really always comes back to credibility. If they have been dealing with you for a while and they know who you are, they'll know that you're just coming with some facts that you've learned that have to be reported.
So, on the subject of your area of expertise, Ariel, health policy. So, as a lawmaker who naturally ends up working on a lot of health policy, one of the challenges that I face when I'm trying to explain what I'm doing and why we're doing it is just explaining the basics of the health policy in the first place, because I find that it's often very dense and people don't understand the mechanism very well. For example, how does Medicaid work, right? Like these are things that take a little bit more explaining background than maybe some other political stories. What approach do you take in terms of writing stories about very dense health policy in a way that is accessible?
Oh my gosh, this is such an issue. Health policy is so complicated. I've covered other subjects, and uh, it for something that is so universally important and just it's obvious when you hurt. It is amazing how complicated some of these policies are. Like the budget bill that just passed, it is a jigsaw puzzle. It is not one big picture. So, I mean, you just always, always, always have to keep the reader in mind. It is never about getting your version of what the policy is or should be in a library book out. It is always, always, always about meeting the reader where they are. And so, if that means that you have to leave a whole bunch of really important technical jargon out of the story, then that's what you do.
I find that so interesting because working in health policy and having an advanced degree in public health, I actually realized that even as a doctor, before I got that public health degree, I did not understand some very basic things about health policy. Like I really didn't understand some of the mechanics of Medicare and Medicaid and a lot of things that we end up working on at the state legislative level. As a physician, I didn't even understand them, right? So I can't imagine for someone who's completely outside of the medical field how impossible it is to
Oh,
know what to
exactly.
care about and what is affecting them.
Yeah, and the thing is that like I run into that all the time as I was reporting on the impacts of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, the spending bill. I was contacting CEOs of facilities and saying, "Look, this is what we understand this does," and they're like, "Oh, does it or doesn't it?" And I was explaining to them. And there might have been, one or two people in the country that I could get on the phone who actually understood what had happened and could explain that to me, and then I could explain that to the people I was interviewing. It's much more frequent than you would think, which really kind of, tells you how hard, it's an extra barrier to getting, I think, policy that everyone would want to see passed, because the first thing you have to do is understand what is the policy.
See, when they say first draft of history, it's no understatement. But I think our jobs are also somewhat similar in that sense too, because yeah, you're a medical professional who's also a lawmaker. You also have to learn how to translate those policies to regular voters and to your fellow lawmakers if you want a bill passed.
I think in some ways that job between journalism and actually being a physician is similar in that way, in that you are taking very complex concepts and trying to figure out how to distill it down and explain it in a way that is not just accessible to people, but to get them to help them make decisions for themselves, right? But
That's exactly right. And I will say that a lot of tension lies there, because there are lobbyists and staff members and lawmakers who work their butts off to get a certain provision in a bill, and they think, and it may actually be the most important thing in the world, but unless you can explain that, how that impacts the reader, it is not the same thing to the reader that it is to that particular individual. And so many times over my life, I have been on a very tense phone call with a source saying, how could you not have included this? We worked so hard on this. And it's like, it just wasn't as impactful to the public as it was to your business.
I think that's such a service to provide to readers also, is breaking things down, because people often don't understand what's going on in government, especially on very dense policy issues. So I've often actually referred my fellow lawmakers to read certain pieces that you do that really break down some of the health policy pieces very well. On that topic of what the job is, what do you think is like the most misunderstood part of being a political journalist? What do people really don't get about what they do?
That we're coming at it from an angle. Like, I was interviewing for a special election for a state senate race, and they were like, "Well, what's your, it's a first time candidate. I'm interviewing him just about, why he's running." He said, "Well, what's your angle?" And I was like, "To inform the people that you're running for senate." Like I don't have an angle. Like, I'm gonna talk to you, and I'm gonna talk to the other candidates, and then I'm gonna take the information that I learned. I'm gonna write an article. And I think people don't always understand that. They always automatically assume that we're coming at it from a slant. And we've all been doing this decades, right? And the number of times I have to say, like, this is just me wanting to learn something and share it with the public is like, it's crazy.
Also, that it takes time. All these movies about journalism, they always show the journalists running around and doing all this cool stuff, and then the story's out, and they're like, "Yay!" But in real life, what they don't see is that it takes time to actually write those stories or put those stories together. Or if you're a TV journalist, to do the packages. Yeah, sometimes I'll bring people with me to shadow for a day, and sometimes it is really cool, and you're interviewing high-profile politicians and TV stuff and radio stuff. And sometimes it's just like it's me in a coffee shop, writing stories and making phone calls, because that's the 80+% of the job is doing that sort of groundwork.
Do you pre-write any of the stories, like some with like the basic building block pieces? Like there's going to be a story about Georgia's abortion bill, for example. So you write the blocks first, and then you fill in.
Yeah, I have a couple. One is no surprises. I try to make sure that my sources to people, as these guys said, it's not a surprise if it's going to be a tough story on you. Hey, we're writing about you did not vote in the past, and now you're running for office. This is what our story is. I'm not, but one of the other things we always try to do is prep. Right. I have a lot of prep stories that never ran. I have some prep stories for Marjorie Taylor Greene running for U.S. Senate that are, that will never see the light of day because she's not running. Prep stories for candidates winning office or losing office that will never see the light of day. But we try to do that as much as possible. And then, of course, be flexible to change those stories as the news comes out.
It's like how people pre-write those obituaries for famous people. It's just like,
Yeah. You've got 3 stories on a really big issue. You'll have win, lose, too close to call.
Yeah. Or court issues, right? Rejected, upheld, somewhere in between.
I've been in Georgia since 2008, right? Which is, I remember I first moved to Georgia, and that first election was Barack Obama's first presidential. And I think it's such a funny political thing to chart your history in terms of which elections things happened during. But, obviously with Georgia, the political scene has changed a lot in the past few cycles, and it's a very exciting place to be working in politics. It's probably a very exciting place to be writing about politics. What are some, big topics that you're looking very closely at that might change soon
Yeah.
in Georgia in the next few years?
The election.
Oh, that.
Yeah. I mean,
Hear
just
about that?
in 2008, you were saying as you came into Georgia, Obama and the Democrats put Georgia on the battleground map. They did not flip Georgia in '08. But of course, Democrats were able to flip Georgia in 2020. Um, 2 Democrats won U.S. Senate that same election cycle. But Republicans still control every other statewide office in Georgia. So 2026 is going to be the latest test. And to me, the exciting part, the thing that keeps us going and keeps me energized about my job is that it feels like the midterms are truly up in the air. You've got very few knowns. You had a lot of knowns in 2022 in terms of who each party's main nominees were going to be, not in terms of the actual outcome, but in terms of who the nominees were going to be. In this cycle, you have a lot of big question marks, except for like John Ossoff, who's going to be the Democratic nominee for Senate. You have a lot of other unknowns, and there's a lot of gambles out there, and we don't know how the electorate's going to react to Donald Trump's return to office, doing the first real big tests. We don't know how Democrats are going to respond yet. We've had a lot of different theories of the case that different Democrats are trying, but we don't know how the electorate's going to respond to that, and how the party is going to coalesce around a message. So those are some of my biggest questions.
Sounds like someone's writing his next book, Graham.
When it comes to, I mean, I don't get as involved as much in the like who's going to win the election thing. I really kind of do the side stories about policy and what's so. Of course, one of those things that you could talk about is Medicaid expansion, and that was a big story for a minute, but probably not at the moment. A very different story.
What's like the biggest thing you're looking at for the next year?
The biggest thing I'm looking at for the next year. I'm having a biggest thing kind of every week these days. It's really the policy coming down from the Trump administration and how that affects people.
I think that for the health policy piece, seeing how that, so-called big beautiful bill is going to interface with how healthcare is accessed in Georgia, right?
Very
Because
much
we have that bill passing in conjunction with losing the enhanced subsidies for the Affordable Care Act. So like a lot of things I think are happening at the same time
Exactly.
on different time frames, right? Like we know that some of the SNAP benefits aren't going to be felt until a couple years down the line, where some things are going to be more immediate. So it's going to be sort of like a cascading effect of just overall people losing access to services and coverage.
And really, there's a timing issue there. I mean, and for one thing, we need to point out that we don't know yet if Congress is going to renew the Affordable Care Act subsidies or not. So that could still happen anytime up until the end of the year. But yes, there is going to be a cascading effect of impacts, good or bad. And some of them you're not going to see until 4 years out from now. So there's a lot of like investment money coming in from the bill right now, but that is going to very quickly shift to losses. And so it really remains to be seen how those will impact people and how people will register those. One of my biggest questions is, are people going to register as the cuts start to really come into play next year and then the following year, and FY27, never, those are going to be big years, but will people register that? So
And then for me, as someone who mainly focuses on the policy side on social issues, I'm watching to see what policies we're going to get from Republicans running for a higher office that are focused on the transgender community. And we recently had, at the federal level, a request to relook at marriage equality. So it'll be interesting to see, especially in election year, how those type of things play out at the state level. And I'm definitely going to be keeping an eye on that because, some of these topics are huge red meat for folks who are running for higher office, especially. And 75% of them are in the Senate. So it's going to be an interesting year.
You're going to have a fun job with this number of state lawmakers running for higher office, and the performative aspects of politics is going to be insufferable.
That's that's a word for it.
It's
Yeah.
like half
This
the
type of
chambers either running for higher office or thinking about it,
Yeah.
if not more. That might be an understatement.
It's unreal, and it's gonna be so there's gonna be so much grandstanding, and we also have new leadership at the top
Mhm.
because the top Senate officers had to resign their posts. So like
Yeah,
it's
right.
going to be, it's going to be, I'm not going to cuss, but
You'll sleep on
Be a
your bed.
mess.
Well, speaking of eyes on the chamber, I can't have you over to my house and not ask you about what is the name of that list that you do? It's the
It's
best
just
dressed
best dressed Georgia
legislators.
lawmakers.
So here's the question that I have because I always want to know this. What is I'm sure that some people really want to be on the list.
Mm.
Some people maybe care less, but some people have, I'm sure, put themselves in front of you, auditioned for you in a way. Can you tell us some of the stories of people who have been quite thirsty to be on the list and what they've done?
Yeah, there have been times that I'll get a text message and be like, "Oh, where are you? I need to come see you." And I'm like, "Okay." And I think they're coming to give me like some news tip.
Scoop.
And then they'll just walk up and like pose. And I'm like, "Okay, yeah, you look nice today." Like there's just like I just really like this outfit. I thought you should see it. And I'm like, "Okay." But on the other hand, it's fair because I'm one person and I'm mostly in the Senate and most of the legislators are in the House. And so a lot of House members will do like 'cause if I don't see you, then how am I going to know that you dress well? So yeah, so there's been a lot of auditions. I get a lot of messages from family members of lawmakers who didn't make the list. How, I can't believe you didn't put this person. My son gets his suits made in Italy. And I'm like, okay,
Do you take that in consideration for the next year? Be like, all right, acceleration points for you for next year's list.
it's actually demerit.
Yeah, I would think that would
Yeah.
Lawmakers,
a
take
little bit
heed.
jockeying.
Make sure your mom is not texting Maya being like, my son
Yeah.
is
No.
so beautiful.
Yeah.
How could you?
Like literally, like I'm like, because I have a running list, right? There of people and it rolls over from year to year. And so you might have been on that list and in consideration for next year, but now you've annoyed me. And so I am the end all be all. So
There's
there's
no committee.
there are so many factors that go into who makes the list.
All right, lawmakers, take heed. Start planning your outfits now.
Yeah.
Thank you all so much for being here. I thought this was a fascinating conversation. I love behind the scenes stuff and I love to learn about other professions that I don't have. So thank you so much for being here.